David Frank. I'm a professor at the University of Oregon. I'm delighted to see you here this evening as we are gathered to talk about important ideas and to celebrate the notion that there are many different opinions one can hold about a particular topic. This is the Contrarian Forum, and we have created the Contrarian Forum in order to foster debates and dialogues and discussions about issues that may divide us and bring us together. This is a public assembly, and so we ask that you remain polite and silent during the advocacy. You will have a chance at the end of the discussions and arguments to make points of your own. So we do ask that you remain civil so that we can foster genuine and good public argument. The Contrarian Forum at the University of Oregon is designed to bring to campus advocates noted for their positions and expertise on the controversial issues of the day. At the core of the mission of the university is academic freedom, but at the same time, academic freedom needs to be complemented by responsibility. And so it is incumbent upon professors who have both freedom and responsibility to ask themselves and others whether the academic freedom that we try to pursue is being guaranteed to themselves and to students. Tonight we've invited two advocates, nationally prominent advocates, to share with you their perspectives on academic freedom at the University of Oregon and nationally. Cary Nelson, who you will hear, he'll be on the affirmative, is the president of the American Association of University Professors. Opposing him in a civil manner, and Cary will also present civil arguments, is David Horowitz, who is president of the Freedom Center. To welcome us to this event, David W. Wilson, who is the president of Northwest Christian College, will now come and give you a greeting. I deeply appreciate the gesture that he has made to share this wonderful new facility with us so that we can host issues or debates and other discussions that will help us to be better informed. David Wilson, thank you.
Thank you, David. Good evening. Welcome to Northwest Christian College, and welcome to our Morris Event Center, opened in 2003, home for NCC athletic events, concerts, lectures, and numerous community events. My name is David Wilson. I'm the president of Northwest Christian. We are pleased to be hosting this Contrarian Forum and pleased to be a co-sponsor of this International Promise of Reason Conference. And we are grateful to John Gage and David Frank for the invitation to partner with the university in such an important academic endeavor. I would like to say a brief word about the U of O-NCC relationship. Eugene Sanderson founded this institution as Eugene Divinity School in 1895 and purposely located us across the street from the University of Oregon in order to take advantage of the resources of the university. We've been good neighbors with a good collaborative relationship ever since, academically and otherwise. Our emergence from an institution devoted entirely to ministerial training to today's comprehensive liberal arts institution that includes a diverse array of undergraduate majors along with 4 graduate programs takes another step forward on July 1st when our name changes to Northwest Christian University. You'll be hearing more about that in the coming days. And finally, if you will indulge me, let me take this opportunity to ask you to mark your calendars. On November 2nd at Mack Court, the University of Oregon and Northwest Christian University compete in men's basketball. Watch out, Ducks. Here come the Beacons. Enjoy the evening. Thank you.
The great Belgian philosopher Chaim Perlman envisioned a society in which problems would be dealt with through discussion, dialogue, and discourse, not through violence. At the university for the last week, we've been celebrating the 50th anniversary of the most important work of argumentation in the 20th century, titled The New Rhetoric. And in that book, there is a vision of individuals who do disagree, but do so making use of good reason and good argumentation. And so our hope is, our aspiration is, that you will join with us in carefully listening to the advocates as they present their various positions, to make judgments as you see fit, to feel free to conclude that both advocates have good points, or that one advocate has a better point than another, or that they both might be wrong. But we are here to reason together, to think through the issues together, and to consider the mission of the university and higher education. And so we've constructed an experimental format designed to foster genuine discussion and dialogue. It is an experiment. And so what you'll see in a moment is a video constructed by Rebecca Purris, who's a student in both the Honors College and in the School of Journalism and Communication. She's an Emmy-winning producer. And in this video, she's tried to capture the various and diverse voices at the University of Oregon. There are those who believe, as you'll hear near the beginning, that the university is relatively free, that individuals can express their opinions as they see fit. As the video evolves, you'll hear other voices that express concern about a stifling of their ideas, a chilling of free expression, and the notion that certain ideas are privileged over others. And so the video, that's 11 minutes long, is designed to set the context for the debate and discussion that will follow. In concert with our vision of trying to create a context that will help us to better reason together, we have invited two nationally known experts in communication and argumentation to offer commentaries during the process of the forum. Michael Leff, Professor Leff, would you please stand? And Barbara Warnick. And I ask that you offer to them your expression of appreciation for serving as experts critics. As I mentioned at the end of our session, you will have a chance to pose some questions or to make your arguments. But again, I ask that you remain quiet as the advocates present their points of view. So let us watch Rebecca Purris's production, 11-minute video of different voices at the University of Oregon.
My name is Contrarian.
Ryan Connell,
Cheyenne Sagari,
Jeremiah Page,
Leslie Ryan,
Janet Kwame,
Ruben Zoller,
Suzanne Clark,
Norma Katie,
My name's Ian Durkee. I'm a graduate student.
PhD candidate,
pre-med student.
I teach history,
modern literature,
I'm a GTF,
I'm majoring in electronic media, biology.
architecture major, psychology.
The University of Oregon has a very proud tradition of academic freedom, and I think that for the most part the University of Oregon is a very good place to teach and encourages professors to feel free to follow their disciplinary inquiry and to do research according to their own scholarship.
Teaching here is one of the places where I feel really free. Nobody ever tells me what I should teach and what I shouldn't.
I haven't had any interference with what I've done. It's actually been a pretty amazing place, and I can't imagine a place that would have more freedom and give me more room to do what I want to do.
I've been here 27 years, and I've never been pulled in about what I've been teaching. I've never been corrected about it. No one's ever said anything to me, and I am markedly at opposition to my colleagues frequently.
I've been able to create my own classes, decide what the topic was going to be, how I was going to construct the class, and have only had help from the other faculty members.
Honestly, I've never had anybody give me any criteria for how I teach, for how I set up the class.
I've been able to branch out into directions that have really been inspiring to me and then good for my research. So there's been a lot of support.
You can have a culture of academic freedom, But if faculty doesn't have enough support, the freedom to research is meaningless.
Of course, the University of Oregon is subject to the kinds of pressures that everyone is subject to.
There is pressure. There's pressure in the landscape architecture department because it's a professional degree, if nothing else. And if it's a professional degree, you have the professionals, the professional landscape architects, who have a vested interest in what students learn, how they learn it, because there's more of a goal in a professional degree to actually create students who can be good employees.
I'm an architecture major, so a lot of the projects or the courses that I take are design-based. And a lot of times I feel like in our studios or in our design classes, the instructor already knows what he or she wants to see or what they want the students to design.
So there's outside the university pressure to teach certain things.
Sometimes it feels like you're being stunted because you can't do the kind of design or expressions that you want to do.
If you tell someone who's engaged in scholarship what they should and shouldn't talk about, then you're imagining that you know what they should talk about. But my argument would be that you don't ever really know absolutely what kind of inquiry should happen in a university, and you have to be free to pursue knowledge and pursue truth. You have to be free to pursue inquiry where it leads you, and you have to be free in the classroom to let your students pursue inquiry where it will lead them. And if you are constantly trying to tell your students, no, you can't bring that subject up, or no, that's not appropriate, or no, that's politically wrong, or it's subversive, then you're limiting their ability to learn. You're limiting the very heart of what it means to be in a university and to be engaged in the pursuit of knowledge.
My general rule of thumb is, for any opinion that a student offers, it has to be backed up by evidence in the text.
If I speak up against what my professor seems to kind of think, most of the time I think they're pretty fair about it, but they're often also pretty passionate about their point of view because they've studied it a lot.
I want students not to agree with me necessarily because a lot of issues are not black or white. A lot of issues are gray.
Whenever I've had a difference of opinion with the professor, it's just sparked more conversation.
I think it makes a class more vibrant, and also it creates an atmosphere of critical thinking. You don't always have to agree with a professor.
All my teachers that I may have disagreed with about certain issues have always kept it as a comfortable conversation if I tried to talk to them about it. So I never felt uncomfortable with the way that a professor responded to me about an issue that I disagreed with.
I come from Ghana. It's a different style of teaching that is changing, which is more like the professor is kind of this authoritarian, knows it all. In the United States, I realize that it's open and that students have that freedom to express alternative viewpoints, and it's very much encouraged.
I think it's extremely dangerous not to have academic freedom. You have to have a principle of academic freedom on campus, and you have to allow professors to make mistakes, to say things that they will be proved wrong about, even things that sound politically risky, and to be willing to trust that the free atmosphere of a university will allow students and other professors to argue with them, and through the processes of argument to arrive at a closer approximation to the truth.
Sometimes professors make sweeping, observations or announcements, and that might be one-sided. And if I feel like that, I'll try and call them on it.
I'm pretty definite in my ideas, though I'm open to suggestion and I'm open to a good argument anytime.
I speak up, but I kind of feel like they don't take it to heart. I kind of feel like they just kind of brush you off a little bit, maybe just kind of get you out of their hair.
I have seen more conservative students speak up, and sometimes they have a good discourse, but I have seen professors also brush those students off sometimes.
I was in this class earlier. It was like an environment and philosophy class, And this one girl was, I think she was Christian. She was super religious, and I think one time she voiced her opinions, and I think the teacher was really not Christian, and so it just got kind of awkward in class.
I had a journalism teacher who was very, like I said, he's pretty anti-church. He just like, everything that he said with regards to religion was kind of like mocking it. And I really disagreed with that. And he's the kind of teacher that if I did say something, he's pretty set in his ways. So he's gonna argue his side.
For me personally, I have had good experiences and my professors have been good, but I think it's pretty much because I've been in accordance with what they believe also. I think if I were maybe going against the grain, it'd be a little bit harder. Some teachers tend to not show both points of view as much as they should, and that's what I've found in a lot of my classes.
I don't expect anybody to cover all the ground, you know what I mean? Everybody's an individual and everybody's got their own opinions. I can take a class from someone who I know is a conservative person and get that side of it. I can take a class from someone who I know is coming from a really radical perspective and they can teach me about that. So I don't adhere to this idea that everybody's got to be balanced and fair. I think we're individuals, we each have our own subjective opinion. And you know that, you know what the professors are like, you know, and so you choose accordingly.
A lot of professors here, it's kind of they do make it obvious sometimes that they're politically slanted one way or another, usually on the left side.
Not so much a liberal bias as a liberal like-mindedness. That's different. It's what most people think.
I think a lot of professors do try and give both sides. I've had teachers that don't on certain issues, and especially in history or political science classes, I feel like maybe it's more of an indoctrination than a lecture, but that's rare. More often than not, I think professors do give both sides, but they make it very obvious a lot of times which side of the issue they stand on, which maybe is a little more persuasive than students than actually listening to the facts.
And they don't specifically say, you know, that one side is wrong, but they make it clear kind of through their speech.
Certain history classes that I've taken, even some psychology classes that I've taken that have touched on like Arab and Israeli issues, have tended to be more biased than I would have expected on a university campus, especially a liberal university campus. There's some courses where if you think that global warming isn't true, and there are some people who think that global warming isn't true, you're screwed because that's what the whole class is based on.
A lot of times in my media classes, I think the group that I hear trashed the most, it's not a minority, it's Fox News. It doesn't matter what class it is, if you mention Fox News as like a relevant source, you're a lot of times laughed at by the teacher and the students.
Fox News has, and even, you know, our president isn't very popular with a lot of the faculty here. It's more joking stuff, so it's maybe not as harmful.
Certain classes being biased, that can definitely put a hold on the freedom to learn, because in that case, it's like the freedom to learn certain things but not other things, which makes the freedom to learn kind of a touchy and controversial issue in itself.
Being a grad student here, I think I have a lot of freedom to learn and grow and expand my horizon.
I do feel like I have the freedom to learn at the University of Oregon, and I don't feel like professors try and kind of stifle your learning or stifle your opinion.
When it comes to the freedom of being able to see different points of view and find out about like the little people in situations, I feel like there's always room to grow.
My impression is that academic freedom is constantly being challenged and overall is actually quite healthy.
So if I can invite the advocates to come. You will witness an ancient art in the next 50 minutes, the art of debate. It goes back many years, practiced in many different traditions, and this tradition involves two advocates joining together to disagree, making use of reason. And so the first person who will speak is Cary Nelson. He will speak for 10 minutes, each advocate will have the same amount of time. There's a level playing field here. And so Cary Nelson will speak for 10 minutes. We have two timekeepers down here who will give clear time signals, and I will be behind as well. We'll give you some leeway over 10 minutes, but not much. Then after Cary Nelson finishes his presentation, David Horowitz will speak in opposition. And again, this is a debate designed to sponsor good reason, thoughtful inquiry, and to give you some insights into one of the most important issues of the day, academic freedom at the University of Oregon and beyond. Cary Nelson, thank you.
Thank you, David, for this, and those other people who helped organize this, for this wonderful opportunity to talk with you all and to visit one of my favorite cities for a few days. What's entailed in taking the affirmative position in today's debate? We'd first have to distinguish between the freedoms of speech that faculty exercise in their publications versus the freedom that faculty exercise in the classroom. Only a year ago, I would have said the first freedom in publication was alive and well. I can't really say so now. And increasingly, I must reluctantly admit that classroom speech for faculty is not merely imperiled, but genuinely in risk. More than half of our college teachers no longer possess anything like academic freedom as we've known it for decades. They live in a world of fear and insecurity, paradoxically, as intellectuals, compelled toward courage, but as people with no job security, impelled to be cautious. It's quite unlike anything we've seen since the days of McCarthyism, that is, the atmosphere of fear that exists on campuses that do not have tenure, that rely instead primarily on contingent labor to do their teaching. If David and some of his conservative allies were to succeed in instituting a regime of surveillance and punishment of political speech in the classroom, then my position on today's question would have to be a comprehensive no. But that's not yet the case. American higher education might then be reduced to a kind of service industry, the educational equivalent of Starbucks or McDonald's, with perhaps scattered outposts occupied by Halliburton. I'm not actually leveling an accusation against what David or Ann Neal say intend, since their claims are not very stable in any case. I'm talking about consequences, which are not really under David's control or my control or anyone else's. Consequences of proposing legislation, consequences of instituting regimes of reporting political speech in the classroom like Penn State adopted not long ago. 2/3 of America's college teaching is already done by contingent labor. 30 years ago, it was 1/3 of America's college teaching. That's the single largest change in the professoriate, and it's had a huge impact on academic freedom. These are people with little or no job security. If they offend their students, the students' parents, local politicians, citizens or clergy, their colleagues, or those administrators with power over faculty appointments, they can lose their jobs, either immediately or when the next semester begins. There are American campuses where a faculty member who simply speaks to the press or takes issue with an administrative plan or offends a student will be promptly fired. I've visited those campuses, I've talked with those faculty, and that's the current reality throughout much of the country. So I submit the following proposition. The problem with faculty speech is not, as David sometimes has it, its excesses, its political excesses, but rather its self-imposed caution or its active suppression by those afraid of consequences if they speak freely. Now, are there excesses amongst those who do have tenure and job security? I think they might represent 0.1% of the professoriate. I was recently asked my advice about how to handle a problem at one of our most prestigious law schools. A tenured faculty member devoted much of his research to asserting and attempting to prove that African American students in distinguished law schools don't belong there. They're not capable of doing the work, he said. They're admitted into schools above their competence and their promise. He happens to teach a required course for first-year law students. The minority members in his class, unsurprisingly, don't feel that they will be graded fairly, since in effect he's announced they don't belong there and aren't capable of doing the work. My advice when I asked about the case was simple. Academic freedom protects that faculty member's right to say and publish what he wishes, but not, in my view, to teach a required class. I would restrict him to elective courses where he has to win student willingness to vote with their feet one way or another. That was the approach taken not long ago at a well-known Catholic university. A tenured faculty member there devoted substantial class time to anti-abortion lectures, no matter what subject he was teaching. To siphon off his energy, the university decided to give him a course on abortion issues, thinking, well, if he has a forum just for that, maybe he'll let it go a bit in the other courses. Well, as it happened, that the course on abortion issues was an elective course, and not one student would sign up for it. What's interesting, of course, is that I'm sure, since it was a Catholic university, that the overwhelming majority of the students shared his anti-abortion position. They just didn't want to hear a lot of lectures on it every day, so that course failed. Thereafter, he was assigned only elective courses, given his propensity to give those kinds of presentations. By the way, I assume that neither David nor I would assign either of my faculty examples to the radical left. Right-wing or left-wing, faculty excesses can be well handled by our existing systems. Students, moreover, can benefit from any opportunity to judge whether faculty can argue such positions more persuasively than others. They can gain from seeing them tested in debate and discussion, whether inside or outside the classroom. American higher education has responsibilities not, one may say, shared equally by faculty in Iran, Saudi Arabia, or many other countries. We are here not simply to train people for the workplace. We're here to train critical participants in a democracy. We want our students, whatever their majors, to be able to evaluate public policy and political rhetoric. We want our students to know world history and world culture. We want our students to be empowered not just as employees, but also to be empowered as citizens. Contact with passionate, articulate advocacy by faculty arguing their convictions, arguing their point of view, who can inspire students, offend students, challenge students, hail them, is part of that training. Hearing faculty take diverse positions and argue what they believe. What is alive and well across the country, if academic freedom is not alive and well at many institutions, are the principles that have sustained American higher education for decades. As AEUP president, my job is to help defend them. We need to defend them against external attacks, and we need to apply them to new technological and cultural conditions. It will not surprise you to learn that when the AEUP was founded in 1915, we had no policy applying academic freedom to email, to web servers, or to online instruction, since, of course, they didn't exist in 1915. Efforts have been made to undermine academic freedom or shared governance in all these areas. And others, we write the policy at the AEUP that local faculty, like faculty here, can then press their campuses to adopt, to assure that as new technologies exist and we express ourselves by means of them, that academic freedom also obtains. The principles of academic freedom are those necessary to sustain a free and open society. Faculty must be able to speak and write without intimidation and without fear of retaliation. They cannot impose their views on students, but they can advocate for them, which is a huge difference. When institutions fail to enforce such principles, you can anticipate that that represents a systemic failure of administrative responsibilities. And this is a key point in this debate. If an institution doesn't deal with the rare faculty member who imposes political beliefs on students as opposed to just advocating for them, that institution is almost certainly not, for example, pursuing serious cases of sexual harassment. Failure to police intellectual aggression typically accompanies failure to police physical assault. Thus, when I find a campus that can't police faculty excesses, it's typically a campus that fails across a whole range of administrative responsibilities, and you gain nothing by pretending that political speech is a unique problem, when if it is a problem in a class, it's probably endemic of a systematic problem on campus, and one has to deal with widespread administrative incompetence. So such institutions are not likely to protect the academic freedom of their faculty either. Their students and faculty are likely in many ways to be equally vulnerable. We gain nothing by pretending that political speech on campus is a separate problem, when in fact I believe it's not. Students, for example, have the right to maintain irrational and unscientific beliefs, but they can be required to master the consensus views of academic disciplines. If a student wants to believe that Adam and Eve had dinosaurs as house pets, so be it. But they also need to be able to describe the theory of evolution accurately. That's a requirement one can impose on them, no matter what their belief system is. Faculty are not required to give equal time to beliefs they consider erroneous. They may be wrong. They may consider a belief erroneous, and 20 years later they may be disproven. But they're not required to give equal time to positions that they believe are fundamentally wrong. They can advocate for theories and arguments that they believe to be true. No matter what the subject of a course may be, and this is a fundamental difference between David and me, the AAUP believes faculty can make comparisons and contrasts with any subject matter and any historical period. We believe that's the role of an intellectual, to be able to leap across academic disciplines, to be able to leap across historical periods, and make any comparisons and contrasts that occur to you, and to make comparisons and contrasts with contemporary political life as well. That, we think, is what makes a university what it is, and what makes intellectual life on campus vital. Thanks a lot.
So we're going to keep everything fair and equal, so whatever amount of time that Cary used should be given to David.
Hi. I want to apologize to the students who came here to see a structured debate, because this was supposed to be a debate over the proposition that academic freedom, free thought, diversity of thought flourishes on the university. And I thought Cary was going to take the positive view of that, and I was going to take the negative one. So to help you out, where we disagree is that, to me, the threat to academic freedom, the threat to free thinking on a university, to hearing diverse views, to doing just what this forum is about, comes from radical faculty in the AAUP and spineless administrators. Allow me to introduce myself briefly, since I am always misrepresented. I am a political conservative, which doesn't mean I'm not critical of George Bush, but I am a conservative and a Republican. But in terms of ideas and institutions like the university, I am the liberal in the argument. I am a John F. Kennedy conservative, if you like. What he said at the end of that film is exactly right. I am a fierce defender of the independence of the university. I did not advocate spying on teachers or anything like that, as has been alleged. I defended Ward Churchill against the governor of the state of Colorado, who happened to be a personal friend, because you can't fire a teacher for expressing views on the internet, however reprehensible those views. In my view, Churchill never should have been hired, because he's certifiable rather than controversial. But be that as it may, I also defended Erwin Chemerinsky, who you probably haven't heard of, but he's a very left-wing law professor at Duke who was made the dean of the law faculty of a new law faculty that's being created at UC Irvine, which I think should never have happened. I would never, I don't approve of his appointment because he's such an ideologue, but he was appointed, and then conservatives complained, conservative donors, and the spineless chancellor at UC Irvine withdrew the appointment. I went to bat for Erwin. I've debated Erwin. I know him fairly well. Because you can't do that. You can't make a person's politics. I thought that was off. I saw Sean Hannity once get a call, and it was from his sister, and he held up the phone and told 1,500 people to say hi. Anyway, so that's who I am. I believe the university is supposed to elevate intellectual dialogue. It should teach students to reason and not to emote. It's easy. You want to emote, go on Hannity and Combs. That's, go out and argue on a street corner. You don't pay the kind of money students pay to go to a school like this to have, just to express your anger at somebody you disagree with, or to ridicule them, the way the professors in the film ridiculed students who referred to the Fox News channel. I assure you they don't do that with Keith Olbermann and MSNBC or CNN. That is, in some ways, a more dangerous weapon than outright attacks. It's much harder to deal with ridicule from your peers. Civility is essential to an intellectual dialogue. Academic means that you are scrutinizing subjects from various points of view, and you always have a skepticism towards them, that you're teaching, not preaching. You teach students how to think, you don't tell them what to think. So there should be two sides. Students should feel that they have access to different points of view. One of the PhD candidates said when she wants to hear a conservative view, she goes to a conservative professor. I actually was driven here by a student from Hillsdale who probably would know what a conservative professor is, and asked her if she could name any conservatives on the faculty at the University of Oregon, and she could not. A national survey done by two liberal professors at Harvard found that 95% of all faculty in the social sciences and humanities are on the left. That doesn't happen, by the way, by accident. The third thing is that you should not teach opinion as though it was scientific fact. And this is the worst, in many ways, the worst offense. You should tell students, if you're teaching Marxism, you should tell them that that's an opinion. It's not a scientific theory. In my view, it's a thoroughly discredited theory and has as much relevance in sociology and history departments as a flat earthist theory would have in a geography department, but that's my opinion, and if I were teaching it, I would say that. Students should but don't have access to multiple points of view, aside from multiple points of view within the left. I'm a fairly well-known conservative intellectual, public intellectual. A book by Richard Posner, which was a study, he had criteria, named me one of the 100 top public intellectuals in the country, both conservative and liberal. I have spoken on about 400 college campuses in the last 20 years. 3 times I've been invited by faculty, and I applaud the people who invited me here, David and John and Jim, 3 times to debate. Not once in all those 400 occasions in all those 20 years have I been invited by faculty to give a talk. I was at the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee last week. When students came into the hall, there were metal detectors. The university assigned 15 armed police to police the hall. 2,000 flyers advertising my speech were torn down by the Muslim Students Association, which distributed an anti-Semitic cartoon of me. I asked the officers as they ejected 15 raucous students whether they were taking names, and the answer was no. And I knew why, but I asked them anyway, and it's because the administration will do nothing. I cannot go to a university campus and discuss an issue like reparations for slavery 137 years after the fact, the Iraq War, or Islamofascism without taking a bodyguard. I've been attacked 4 to actually more times than that physically at universities. And university administrators understand that there's a threat of violence at their campuses. And so everywhere I go, there are always armed guards. And I may say that this is so, it's just accepted. University administrators tolerate intimidation on their campuses. For the students who were there, the students who helped me organize Islamofascism Awareness Week, Islamofascism is one of those politically incorrect words that you can't use. You cannot connect Islam and terror in a paragraph without being called an Islamophobe or a racist. I leave the campuses, but the students have to stay there, and they are called racists, and many of them are intimidated. And I know this because I had to organize different groups to do my spring week from the fall groups, just because you have to live among people, and they walk around calling you a racist. And of course, I get no support from the AAUP, that's the American Association of University Professors, or from professors who also could do something on these campuses. And I don't think there's a student here who doesn't know that when they approach an issue like racial preferences or affirmative action or issues like Islam and terror, that they have to walk around on eggshells lest they be attacked. And when professors, I mean, you heard the students, you sit in a class and a student mentions something they saw on the Fox News channel, which, by the way, is infinitely more balanced, if you like, and has infinitely more diverse views than the Keith Olbermann show or CNN, for that matter. They get laughed at and ridiculed. And who wants to sit in a class and be laughed at and ridiculed and thought to be one of those brain-dead conservatives? And I do have to mention this. This is so ingrained, even in professors who are not leftists, in liberal professors, that they don't even see the bias when it happens. You know, I was shocked today because I knew there was an article attacking me in the Orange, what do you call it, the Eugene Register Guard, a fairly substantial one. But I looked at it today, and it is my moderator. It is the person who invited me. Now, this is a good man, but he felt incumbent on himself to present me as the bad guy in this debate before I even opened my mouth, and misrepresented my positions. He lumped me with Bill O'Reilly, who called Frohnmeyer a coward, which he is, but did so in a circumstance where I would have disagreed 180 degrees with O'Reilly. I think the campus paper here printed an offensive cartoon, and O'Reilly said, shut it down. I have never taken such a position. I see I've got a time thing going here, so let me, I can't tell you, I have studied hundreds of college courses in which books are presented on only one side of an issue. In fact, I just lost a battle at Penn State, which has the best academic freedom policy in the country, it was just a course in which, well, Al Gore's film was shown, and without any kind of critical material, 2 books were assigned on poverty by leftists, and that was it. It was an English course, by the way. You saw the woman who said that you're an environmental class, and the presumption of the class is that there's global warming, and of course it's man-made. Now, I am not a climatologist, so I don't really know, but that is called indoctrination, since there is a very vigorous controversy over the issue. Whole departments at this university are political indoctrination courses, women's studies, for example. Now, everybody in this audience is familiar with the nurture-nature argument, right? Whether environment determines or whether we're hardwired biologically for various differences. Some people are smarter than others, some are stupider, and so forth. The Women's Studies Department has on its website, it defines its program. The program examines the meaning of gender as a socially constructed category, i.e., environment determines gender. Well, there are other departments at this university, like neuroscience, evolutionary psychology, and biology, which have already proved that there are large gender differences between men and women that have nothing to do with social construction or the environment. It also says that in the women's studies, we study how gender structures the social, political, and economic worlds. Come on, people. Look, I have no problem with a professor who thinks that. I mean, I might have a problem if I were the department chair, but I don't have a problem as an outsider. I do have a problem with an entire department that is based on teaching an opinion that gender structures the world as scientific fact. Students in women's studies are not getting an education in this university, they're getting an indoctrination. And of course, if it's a scientific that gender is socially constructed, they're not going to be reading, and there are a lot of them, conservative theorists on the subject, let alone neuroscientists, let alone liberal neuroscientists like Steven Pinker at Harvard, who knows what the facts say. And if you think this is a minor problem, Larry Summers, who was the most powerful university president in the history of the modern research university, lost his job for suggesting in a closed meeting where only 12 people were present, all of them provosts and full professors and so forth, but only 12 people present, that there's a genetic difference between men and women, which might account for the fact that men, perform better in the hard sciences or at the top of the hard sciences. For merely suggesting that, and there's plenty of data to show that, he was censured, became the first. And of course, Larry Summers is a Clinton cabinet member. He was a liberal, not left enough for these people, but a respected academic and brought a lot of money to Harvard. But he became the first president in the history, and this was just a couple of years ago, first president in the history of the modern research university to be censured by his own faculty and driven out because of his politically incorrect idea. This is a plague on our universities, and as I said at dinner today, our universities in this sense were probably freer when they were denominational and teaching, doctrines, religious doctrines, because at least, well, it's comparable to that, let me put it that way. Instilling doctrines. This is supposed to be a research university where you get exposed to different ideas and you have the freedom to examine them. You can't have the freedom to examine them if people laugh at you. Let me just finish with this, the Barack Obama. What is Barack Obama doing in a film about academic freedom? Well, it was explained to me at dinner also, well, he's the only presidential candidate who came here. Guess why? You think a Republican wants to come to Eugene and have these idiots throwing things at him and demonstrating, and then it'll be all over the tube? Of course not. Our universities are the least free institutions now in our society. I'm not speaking of the hard sciences or anything like that. They're liberal arts schools, and that is not only a crying shame, it is also a danger for the future of this country.
At this point, we pause to hear from Michael Leff and Barbara Wernick, some brief comments about the process and what they suggest we might look for in the rebuttals as we move to the conclusion of our encounter. Barbara and Michael?
Good evening. I guess my perspective here is to address you as audience members and address you in your subject positions as audience members and ask you to think about some questions I'm going to raise in terms of what are your prerogatives and what's your entitlement as being part of the audience here tonight. One question I want to raise is whether provocation equals debate. I think of debate as a set of comparative arguments on issues of import, and so I don't think provocation equals debate, and I, as a subject member in this audience, would like to hear the issues addressed. I will try to just very briefly explain what some of those might be. The proposition is freedom to teach and learn flourishes in American universities. So I am hoping that the participants will address the issues related to that particular topic. And it seems that they would revolve around what policies best promote student learning in the classes of the university. For example, does freedom of academic speech in the classroom actually promote student learning? If it does, then we should have freedom of speech in the classroom, and both conservative and liberal points of view should be readily aired, without penalty to either party. It's interesting to me that both speakers cited specific instances on both sides of the of the political spectrum where people were penalized unjustifiably for their freedom of speech. Our academics, as Professor Cary noted, fearful, cautious. Does this affect student learning? If it does, where is the evidence? Is the problem systemic to academic higher education, or is it specific only to certain institutions? We have a lot of examples being cited, but I would like to know how systemic the problem actually is across different institutions. So those are some things I'm thinking about on one side of the coin. On the other, I wonder whether students should scrutinize the subject from various points of view. It seems that they should scrutinize them from both the liberal and the conservative point of view in order to develop critical thinking. And so the role of, one role of a professor would be to encourage a classroom in which that happens. I want to ask whether the marketplace of ideas works. One of the fundamental concepts of our court system has been the idea of the marketplace of ideas. Now, one of our participants has stated that the University of Oregon does not have a marketplace of ideas because it's so heavily liberal, for example. That's another issue of concern. Another statement that was made is that 95% of the professoriate is on the left, and I'm wondering where the evidence for that is, the factual data-based evidence. How was the study done that concluded that 95% are on the left? I wonder if whether previous examples of personal persecution of an individual are relevant to the issue of whether freedom to teach and learn flourishes in American universities, and if so, how they are relevant. And I'm wondering whether the claim about a condition such as global warming that has wide scientific consensus among the scientists worldwide has become a form of indoctrination. Thank you very much.
I'll try to be brief because you don't want to hear me, you want to hear these guys, don't you? Let me just say a few things about what I think makes for a good debate and then comment about how I see this shaping up to this point. I have 3 criteria that I keep in mind for thinking about the quality of a debate. Number 1, are the issues drawn in a way that's clear and that you can follow them? Do you know what's at stake? Secondly, are the differences between the 2 parties engaged in the dispute lined out in an intelligible fashion so you can tell what consequences there are between the 2 different positions? And third, do the 2 advocates have reasons to support the side of the issue that they maintain. If you use those criteria, I think maybe you can view this debate in a more or less even-handed way. I would say this: we have had some issues come out. Cary Nelson has, I think, raised 3 specific issues indicating why we should not change from the existing system we have in terms of regulating speech or conduct. Number 1, he has held that the problem is not significant, that the harm is relatively limited. It has to do only with 1/10 of 1% of the faculty, and that where in cases where problems exist, they represent a systemic problem, not a problem specifically having to do with freedom of speech. Number 2, he has said that the consequences of trying to intervene would be undesirable, that it creates an atmosphere of fear and repression, and therefore it's not a good idea. And number 3, he has said that it's desirable to sustain a controversial atmosphere in our classrooms, that the development of articulate, passionate views of the faculty, so long as they advocate but don't try to enforce them, is a good thing. On the other hand, David Horowitz takes a very different view of the situation. He believes that there is a significant threat to academic freedom that exists in this country from our universities. He believes that this is the result of faculty, of the AAUP, and spineless administrators. He says that the university should teach students to reason and not emote. Subtext here, I think, is that they're teaching them to emote, that they should teach them how to think, not what to think, that they should not teach opinions as though they are fact. For example, it's his opinion that Marxism shouldn't be taught as anything other than a discredited theory, and he believes that the universities now are the least free institution in the country. Those are the issues at stake. I'm interested in seeing how those differences can be drawn out and developed in the next 5 minutes on each side.
So at this moment, we'll take about 4 to 5 minutes to prepare, allow the advocates to prepare for the rebuttals, and I encourage you to think about what you just heard.
David has challenged me to think on my feet, and obviously I can't resist such a challenge. Let me begin by saying that if anyone is worried that a Republican political candidate would not be willing to appear on the University of Oregon campus for fear that he or she would be heckled, my guess is that there's nothing a conservative candidate would like more than newsreel footage of being heckled on a college campus, a great way to energize the base and get them angry. So the ideal thing would be to hide any prospect of that happening and not do it. When I was an undergraduate at Antioch many years ago, the student body sent out 200 invitations to controversial Americans to speak at the college campus. And not all 200 accepted, but one who did was George Lincoln Rockwell, head of the American Nazi Party. He agreed to speak, asked if he could bring 20 stormtroopers with him. They said no. He asked, well, could I hold a press conference while I was there? He said no. They said, you fly in, give your speech, that's it. There were 500 people in the audience. You could have heard his pin drop. No one complained, no one catcalled, no one applauded, no one laughed. There was absolute silence. He then began yelling at the audience, angry that they weren't heckling him. When it came time for the question period, not a single hand raised in the air. Everyone sat in stony silence, and he left yelling. So civility, extreme civility, can be handy. Last year, Penn State University set up a system for students to register complaints about political opinions expressed in a classroom. And David rightly argued that this was kind of a victory for the kind of surveillance that, or at least opportunity for complaints that he'd been advocating. I thought that was a really terrible thing that Penn State did, because the idea was students could register complaints about political speech by faculty, and that would trigger investigations of those courses. I certainly gave me pause, worried about having 3 investigations a week triggered about my courses, which might indeed have a certain chilling effect on me. But taking classroom speech out of context is extremely difficult and problematic. For example, many of us from time to time play devil's advocate in a classroom. I will sometimes pretend to be a conservative. I will sometimes pretend to be a racist or a sexist if I can't get my students energized in any other way. And bizarrely enough, despite my having previously given plenty of evidence of where I come from politically, suddenly when I undergo this metamorphosis, they all seem to believe it. And I can get them interested and then admit, by the way, I was sort of putting you on once I get the discussion going. But imagine taking something like that out of context, videotaping it with a cell phone with videotape capacity, and then putting that across as the instructor's opinion, his or her genuine position. The classroom just does not need that kind of complaint system or that kind of monitoring to sponsor free speech and controversy in the classroom. I don't recognize, by the way, the campus that David talks about where you can't criticize Islam, although I would not wish to use the term Islamofascism, because I take great pleasure in historical specificity and treating fascism as a very particular form of conservative reactionary governance that wins popular assent and is often elected into power. But I'm quite comfortable with the concept of Islamic fundamentalism. I think it's a reality, and I think most American campuses have many, many people who believe that there is a dangerous fundamentalist component within Islam, that it's not primarily opposed to the United States, but actually opposed to modernity as a whole. And indeed, that makes us understand relationships between Islamic fundamentalisms and other fundamentalisms around the world. And certainly, Islamic fundamentalists, not all of them, but a significant number, promote terror. I just don't find campuses where you can't say that. It doesn't seem to me to be politically incorrect or a huge problem to say it. Faculty members, let me emphasize again, and I agree with Barbara on this, faculty members do not have to represent points of view that their disciplines have rejected. And so, although David may not believe in global warming, the scientific consensus seems to be that global warming is a reality, and faculty members are entitled to teach that scientific consensus, just as they are entitled to teach the consensus of other disciplines, even when that consensus is not scientific. For example, the issue of social construction. The issue isn't whether there are a spectrum of physical differences between men and women. What many people, including me, believe is that the meaning of sexual difference, not the biological fact of sexual difference, is socially constructed. Indeed, I think that all meaning is socially constructed. In other words, how we understand facts is a product of social processes, and that indeed facts are often inaccessible except through that window of social process. And faculty members are entitled to teach that theory out of complete conviction. Thanks.
Cary is entitled to his opinions, but they're opinions. I hope everybody noticed there are 4 professors involved in this, and every single one of them has taken a hit on me. I didn't say Marxism had to be taught as a discredited theory. I said that's my opinion. Cary thinks that Islamofascism is an inappropriate term because some of the Islamofascists are elected. Hitler was elected, won an election. But people can disagree about this. The point is, if you use the term on a campus, you are called a racist and an Islamophobe. So if you're a student, it's one thing for me. I've been called a racist and Islamophobe and a McCarthyite, a Maoist, a Leninist by members of Cary's organization. by the way. So I'm, and I don't live on the campuses, thank goodness. I live among horses who are very, very tolerant creatures. But these are students here. Cary is upset about Penn State. I don't want to get into a big thing. The Penn State academic freedom provision is half a century or more old, and it is word for word taken from the American Association of University Professors academic freedom provisions. It just says that a professor is obligated. The function of a professor in a democracy is not to indoctrinate students. Therefore, the professor is obligated to present students with access to materials that will allow them to think intelligently. And that means, according to this, that divergent opinions must be presented in a fair-minded and judicious manner. It happens that the adjudicator, since the administration, when Cary refers to shared governments, that means that the inmates rule the asylum, that professors have authority over everything that goes on in the classroom. Therefore, this entire process goes to the dean of the College of Liberal Arts at Penn State, who happens to be a far-left feminist, who happened to actually decide on one issue quite fairly, I thought, and on another not so fairly. But when you have this kind of opposition, this is presented as kind of a police state in the making at Penn State, no progress can be made, and students will have to sit in classes where not what does Cary say, 0.1%, 10% of a faculty, as I have shown, I showed it and I argued it very clearly in my book, The Professors, are ideologues who impose their views in the classroom on students. The question was asked of where I get the studies of 95%. There have been a dozen studies. You can go up to studentsforacademicfreedom.org and look under diversity studies. This one happens to be Neil Gross was the lead investigator, and it was a massive survey, and it was done, by asking professors what their views were. Global warming is a consensus. Well, for half the country it is. Like I say, I'm not a climatologist, but I know enough to watch the debate and see. Well, let me ask you: how many people would rely on the weatherman for a life and death decision if he predicted the weather 2 weeks out? These people are predicting 100 years out. Anyway, it is a controversy, and it should be taught as a controversy. It should not be presumed. And it's not whether there's global warming, it really is the influence of human beings on the warming factor, and whether the warming is, as Al Gore, who is no climatologist, thinks the end of the world. That's the issue. Does freedom of speech in the classroom promote teaching? Well, this is a big issue. Academic freedom is not freedom of speech. What it is a freedom to pursue your inquiry to wherever it leads you, and then the freedom to publish that without reprisal. And Cary and I will agree that that is a really good thing for universities to have. But of course we don't allow professors to have freedom of speech in the classroom. If a physics professor, if a chemistry professor had freedom of speech and started teaching the phlogiston theory, or an astronomy professor was teaching astrology, there would be something wrong with the contract, wouldn't there? Students would be being cheated of getting a proper education. So there are restrictions on what a professor can do, and those are professional restrictions. A professor, according to the American Association of University Professors in its classic documents on academic freedom before it was taken over by leftists, when it was actually liberals, which I consider myself on these issues, it said professors have to teach according to the scientific method. In other words, you have evidence where there is opinion and not scientifically proven fact, which is everything in the social sciences and humanities practically, or everything you could say. These are subjective fields. Then students have to be exposed to the controversy. That's what teaches them to think. That's what this exercise is about. When you turn on the television and watch court TV and you don't see the defense attorney, you know you're missing some, even, you're all waiting. I mean, I know I am, because here's a monster, you know, and somebody's going to defend him. So you want to hear the argument, and you always have missed something. These guys can come up with, well, anyway. It's the same thing with every argument that takes place in the humanities and social sciences, and it is a crying shame that it's absent from our campuses. And when I'm, said, well, what is one individual's experience? I said, I'm a prominent conservative intellectual, and I am treated like a pariah on campuses generally. Not here, and that is a good innovation, although I have been attacked before I even open my mouth, which is not a level playing field by any means. I don't see any will within the university to change that situation. I don't see it at all. It wouldn't be that hard to do. And the issue of civility, why? And people who think that they can't, you can go up to my website. You can go up and see the videos of what's going on at the University of California, Irvine, where the campus has just been taken over by Hamas-supporting, terrorist-supporting, Jew-hating Muslims and their American left-wing allies, screaming at students, screaming anti-Semitic things. This is what happened at the University of Wisconsin, and it happens all over the country. I'm not the only conservative who needs bodyguards when they go to campuses. And I think Cary's point is a good one, that a Republican could come. Ronald Reagan certainly got elected by doing that to a campus and be attacked by loonies. But of course, McCain happens to be, he's got to win by winning independents and Democrats. I don't think he wants that. But that isn't the point. The point is everybody knows these campuses are incredibly hostile and incredibly rude and ill-mannered, and there are no adults around saying to students, this is not the way to behave in a university. This is not the way to behave in a university. That's what I'm asking for. I want to be defended by faculty when I come to a university. I don't want to have them boycotting my speeches, which is what they do. They require students to attend left-wing ideologues and give them credits for doing it. I want them to protest the fact that these students' flyers are taken down, that the campus papers will not support conservative events, and to create a dialogue on the campus. How difficult is that? This is supposed to be an educational institution. It's not an educational institution when people think that everything that they think is a consensus, and only everybody who's rational in this world votes Democratic, thinks abortion should be, and I actually am in the middle on this issue, but abortion should be, through the ninth month, and you can even suck a baby out of a womb that's live, and so forth. That global warming is such a menace that we should surrender half of our rights and most of our income, to stop it. Okay, everybody knows what the shibboleths are. Or that if you point out that the Muslim Students Association on 150 campuses is an arm of the Muslim Brotherhood, which created Hamas, and is supporting bringing in speakers who say homosexuals should be killed, defend the unbelievable oppression of women in Islamic countries where 140 million girls have their genitals sliced off every year, to deny them pleasure because it's evil. It's just beyond me what's happened to the progressive so-called left in this country, which is actually truly reactionary, since everybody seems to be defending Karl Marx these days.
Yeah, I'll just take a minute, and then maybe we can I guess we go to other comments again, then questions. I'm just interested to hear what people will have to say. Let me just make one distinction. I have no objection to David or anyone else arguing, say, that global warming should be taught as a controversy, so long as faculty are free to ignore him. That's what academic freedom means. You can have a debate about how a subject can be taught. That debate can be lively on campus, but a faculty member has the right to take his or her position on that debate and exercise his or her freedom in how they teach. I have no objection to people arguing that faculty should not express their political views in the classroom. Most of my colleagues don't express their political views in the classroom and are proud that they've spent, decades avoiding that, so long as faculty are free to ignore that advice and develop their own ethic of teaching. A lively debate about the ethics of teaching, which I think David can contribute to, is a healthy thing for American campuses. So long as no single ethic is enforced by the administration, by faculty senates, by legislative powers outside the university, by churches, by parent-teacher associations, or anything else. That kind of debate that challenges people about how they teach and what they teach is, I think, a very good and productive thing, but so is the academic freedom that lets each of us make our own individual decisions in the end about what our proper teaching style should be. We don't need only one teaching style in the United States. We need an incredible range of them, and that's, in fact, what we have. Thanks.
All right, well, when I spoke with you before, I asked you to think of yourself as an audience member entitled to certain things, one of which would be to address the issues, another of which would be to expect for evidence to be offered in support of the claims that are made, just to review that. And so right now, I think we're kind of, I'm getting a little frustrated because I don't think some of these things are happening. I want to again pose the question of whether previous instances of persecution against a speaker are relevant to the issues of the debate, and whether provocation equals debate. For me, debate is something that leaves me better informed about what I came to hear than when I first arrived in the auditorium. And so I ask you to think about whether you feel that that's happened. I think we need a forum for deliberation here, and that the purpose of a debate should be to inform the audience and not to mislead or merely entertain them. So I'd like for you to keep that in mind. I think that listeners should be positioned by the speaker to make informed decisions on the issues, and so I'd like for you to keep that in mind. And I feel as a listener that that hasn't happened for me yet here. And I hope that we can stay with the issues and avoid the response to provocation. Thank you very much.
I must apologize to David Horowitz. I did let slip out a judgment about his views on Marxism. I do apologize for that. I meant to be as even-handed as I could be. I in fact, believe that Mr. Horowitz has a point, and I think Cary Nelson expressed something the same sentiment, that there is a kind of uniformity that exists on university campuses. As one of the professors who was interviewed on that film said, it's not so much as, it's not a conspiracy, it's just a like-mindedness. And that's something that we should be aware of, and we should try to deal with by stirring up a little bit differences of opinion. Mr. Horowitz has come here, he's presented his differences of opinion, He feels that he's been attacked by 4 professors, and yet people have sat here, listened to him courteously, have had him had his say. We've heard it, and I think we're in a position to judge whether or not he has made the case that we need to alter our system of administering universities to ensure freedom of speech. Thank you.
It's 8:25, and we promised that you'd have an opportunity to respond. Let's keep this section to about 20 minutes. What we'd like to do is to invite you to either pose a question to one or both of the advocates, and if you want to make an argument yourself, we would expect you to do so by marshaling some good evidence and some good reason, and to keep it succinct and cogent so others can have an opportunity to make an argument if they'd like to. My colleague Ann Laskaya and Jim Crosswhite will be at the microphones, and so again, we ask that you pose good, succinct questions to our advocates, or if you want to make an argument yourself, then do so quickly, and then we'll invite our advocates to respond if they so choose. I guess the goal would be for you, if you want to ask a question, to go to the microphone.
Cary, I'm John Hill. I'm retired from the Navy. I'm one of the Navy divers from the bestseller of 1999, Blind Man's Bluff. I spent 22 years diving out of, in, and around nuclear submarines. And on Professor David Frank's Sunday editorial, he says about the professor that Mr. Horowitz wrote about, according to his department head, no student has ever complained about the professor demanding allegiance to Marxist insights or attempting brainwashing in the classroom. Now, I know Americans. I know Americans inside the nuclear envelope, and that's not possible. You cannot get 100 people to agree about nuclear power and how to repair it minute to minute. How do you get a professor to go through a professorial career without dissent? Now, Cary, I got a question for David, if you don't mind, before you answer. I'm just going to go sit down. David, figure the odds that the authors of Intelligent Design can come to this campus and debate Darwin's theory with some of these professors.
Is this a question to me? I want to thank Michael, first of all, for his remarks. I don't see how you can have, if you have on a campus, we have an audience here that a lot of older people. We have students from a class that are studying the debate. My sense on a university campus is that most students and most professors are decent. They are scholarly. They're interested in studying. However, when you have what we used to call, when I was in the left, a vanguard, when you have groups like the Muslim Students Association or Students for Justice in Palestine or the International Socialist Organization, very small in terms of the number of students, come and disrupt and harass students. And when you have radical faculty who tolerate ridicule of a student for referring to something that they saw on the Fox News channel, you have just changed the whole atmosphere, and you have destroyed the possibility of people actually entertaining other points of view. That's my position. I happen to disagree strongly with Cary about, and everybody who said there's the global warming consensus, because there are scientists, very distinguished ones, who challenged the thesis. And in fact, Bjorn Lomborg, who's a statistician and who was once one of the leaders of the global warming and environmental movement, he wrote a book called The Skeptical Environmentalist, and he's raised serious issues about what's being said. There is a controversy, and it's a scientist, On intelligent design, I'm going to have to disagree with the speaker. The intelligent design is not a theory supported by the scientific community. It's appropriate, I think, in a philosophy of science course to raise these issues, but I don't think it's not appropriate to teach. However, I will agree with the speaker on this. An intelligent design theorist should be able to come to this campus and present his views. I mean, I've seen it done on C-SPAN. It's what convinced me that intelligent design is not a scientific theory, because I watched a debate. But again, this is a learning experience. And I agree with Cary that, you know, there shouldn't be any authority asserting, well, I don't agree wholly, asserting an ethic in the classroom. Professors are a very privileged case. Now, the economic situation is changing, and Cary is an expert on how it's changing. When he refers to adjuncts and things like that, that's probably beyond most people in the room, and I would be fuzzy myself. But the fact of the matter is that tenured professors make a lot of money relative to the rest of the population. They have incredible job security, incredible perks. They get a 4-month paid vacation that coincides with all family vacations. Sure, they only make $100,000, but when you're only working 8 months a year, you know, that factors out to a lot more than that. That's a lot of money. And they do it because they've signed a contract. If you look at the way this university presents itself, it presents itself as a modern research university, which means that people follow scientific method, that they're professional, that they teach their expertise, that they don't major in women's studies or comparative literature and teach about the globalization and the global imperialist system, which is what goes on in the women's studies department, not only at this, but at every university that I've studied, which is plenty.
Just going to say very briefly, the example of University of California, Irvine was brought up as a campus where there is an overwhelming bias toward one side of the Arab-Israeli conflict, and that free speech there is impossible. I just thought it would be worth saying that for the last year, the Ford Foundation has sponsored one of its difficult dialogues projects on the Irvine campus, where pro-Palestinian and pro-Israeli faculty and students get together regularly for quite civil discussion and debate. They actually have produced a series of articles about those interactions. So it's actually, in that respect, a campus where I think dialogue is very well behaved in those meetings, and indeed quite ideal, and the Ford Foundation is trying to set up the Irvine campus as a model for how that debate can be carried on in a civil way. The gentleman asked, how could you teach a particular position without receiving any complaints in a whole career? And I think the issue is not that students would not disagree with a faculty member. They disagree with faculty members all the time. The issue is whether formal complaints about a faculty member were lodged or not. I mean, I've taught for 38 years without there ever having been a formal complaint lodged against me by a student, so I don't think that's unusual. The distinction is between disagreements versus formal complaints being lodged with an administration.
I want to follow up on Professor Warnick's comments. I didn't know what the proposition was coming into here, but I think it was, according to Professor Warnick, freedom to teach and learn flourishes in the American university. Is that correct?
Yes.
That was the proposition that's being debated. And it seems to me that both of you would say, no, it does not. So I'm used to hearing clash in the debate, and I realized that there was clash over certain things. But do you have any clash over that proposition?
Well, remember, for what it's worth, we did both agree to this evening before we knew that there was going to be any proposition, let alone that one, right? We have debated before, so we agreed to come and debate, and then much later we were given that proposition. I simply couldn't debate the affirmative side of it in an unqualified way. because the demographics of American higher education has changed so much in 30 years. And David talks about the tenured faculty, but only 1/3 of the faculty on an American campuses either has tenure or is eligible for it. 30 years ago, 2/3 of them did. So I felt I really had to register the brutal fact that a large portion of the professoriate no longer possesses the same kind of academic freedom that we have valued for so very long. And I've visited many campuses where no faculty members feel that they have any academic freedom at all. So once I got the proposition, I realized I couldn't simply take a uniform position about it, but had to kind of draw that distinction. Do I think on a campus like this one that relies heavily on tenure that academic freedom is alive and well? Yes, I do. But Oregon or Illinois, many flagship state university campuses are no longer characteristic of American higher education as a whole. I mean, this is a very privileged world. But the world in which faculty members earn $25,000 a year as opposed to $100,000 a year is not a very privileged world. Yeah. And the world in which faculty members don't know next year whether they will have a job or not is not a privileged world. So higher education has really changed in 2 generations, and it's that difference that I thought I had to point out at first.
Yeah, Cary thinks that I think that the threat to the freedom to learn comes from ideologues on the faculty, administrators who won't enforce civility, and a failure of the professions, the academic professions, to impose on their members a professional disposition, as called for actually in the AAUP's documents, which incites the public reaction. I actually warned the president of the University of Colorado, before word Churchill ever surfaced, that she had a problem because she had a campus that was overwhelmingly left-wing. There was no visible conservatives on the faculty, that we were in a war on terror, and that one day some of her radicals were going to go over the edge and cause a public reaction that damaged the university. That's my view. Cary's view is that the threat to the freedom to teach and learn is me and people like me.
I think he argued that it was self-imposed. I thought he argued that it was self-imposed caution rather than you yourself. That was
but these it's like.
Do I think
the Penn State academic freedom provision, to me, is a protection for people like Cary, because if there is in place a way to hold professors to professionalism, which is what it's about. You're going to teach about poverty, you teach a spectrum of views. You don't assign Barbara Ehrenreich, who's a socialist journalist, she's not even a sociologist, you sign her book, and you don't assign, a paper, say, from the Heritage Foundation, so that students can examine the argument. If the profession won't police itself, it's going to periodically create adverse public opinion. I can tell you right now, there are billionaires around who give all their money, to gymnasiums or to the hard sciences, because they feel that the liberal arts colleges are just training institutions for radicals. That is what is hurting the university.
I do think this campus is aware that there are billionaires who only give money to athletic programs. And the last questioner is right. Yeah, I think the greatest danger to academic freedom is the fear of faculty members who don't have the fear to express their views openly, the fear to teach controversially, not at institutions like this, but at many across the country, and worse than that, across the world. I don't think that David is the greatest threat to academic freedom. I think you're right, that I think self-imposed caution is a much greater threat.
Comment and a question. The first comment would be that I'm a tenured faculty member of a major research institution, and I will never make anywhere near $100,000, even if I live till I'm 155. So I just wanted to correct that, not to give any political views either way. Actually, friends on the opposite political side will never make anywhere near 100,000 either.
What will you make?
Probably never more than 70.
70 for
Yes.
8 months' work. Okay.
No, I work all year long. I teach summer school.
How
as
many
well.
hours a week do you spend in class?
In class or
In
grading
class.
papers at home?
In
and
class.
Taking care of my.
In class.
Well, I'm not going to answer that
I
because
know,
in
'cause
class
it's
is not the
6
job.
or 9. Most people have to be in an office like 40 hours a week.
But they don't have to do anything at home when they go home.
Well, actually, teachers in our K-12 schools have to grade papers at home, and they work, full day.
That wasn't what I was going to. I just wanted to let you know that the 100,000 figure was way off anyway. But
Well-
my question is for either one of you, and it's just a fact question. We've talked a lot about social science and humanities professors being 95% liberal, and I don't object to that. I don't know whether it's factually true or not because I haven't looked it up, but I'm going to believe you on that. But what about professors and other, are there any statistics on faculties in other disciplines that are not social science or humanities? Are there figures on that, and what are the political leanings on those?
The professors as a whole tend to be on the liberal side. It's not as extreme. In like sociology and anthropology, it's like 30-1, liberal to conservative. But what's happened on the campuses is that an atmosphere has been created. I mean, most people are sensible, and they don't do what I do. I mean, they're conflict averse. They don't like to be called names. They want the approval of their immediate peers. So you create a community where nobody is insisting on respect for other points of view. I'm not asking for agreement with my point of view or with conservative points of view. I'm asking for respect, particularly for students who have these views. These professors are not hired just to teach left-wing students. They're hired to teach all the students, and they should not be what that student said, this professor was so hostile to religion, he made the students feel awkward. Now, I think that we don't know what class he was in. He probably wasn't in a religion class. What is the professor doing just ventilating all his prejudices in a classroom? Maybe he's supposed to be teaching, or she is supposed to be teaching English literature. What does their anti-religious prejudices have to do with the teaching of English of texts? That's all. It's just we've allowed a culture to develop where professors leak their prejudices, and it should stop. They should be professional. You don't go to a doctor and expect to get a lecture on the war in Iraq. So why should you get it from your English professor, who knows as much about the war in Iraq as anybody you could, haul off the street and get them to do it for free?
Let me say something about that, about the studies of the political affiliations of faculty members. One of the main ways those studies are conducted is to ask faculty members what their party registration is. But that doesn't tell you anything whatsoever about how they conduct themselves in the classroom. There's no necessary connection between party affiliation and classroom speech, point one. Point two, when you hire faculty, you ordinarily have absolutely no idea what party they're registered for, and it's not appropriate to ask them. Now, it is probably true that there are many disciplines that tend to draw liberal faculty more than conservative faculty to the doctoral programs. My own field, English and American Literature, I think is one of those. So your odds are that a majority of your job candidates are probably going to be registered Democrat. That's just the character of the field. There are certainly disciplines where the spread of voter registration amongst the faculty is different. It tends to be different in engineering than it is in English or history, for example. But it's a flaw to think that because faculty members are registered Democratic, that they express those views in the classroom.
Cary is simply wrong about this. I did the studies because I'm not a sociologist, and when I started this, my academic freedom campaign, because I've been on campuses and because I interview students, I knew that there are no conservatives around. I can just ask the college Republicans, how many professors are available to sponsor your club? So I devised an incredibly crude study just because the opposition to me, which always came from faculty, was, okay, how do you know, da-da-da-da. The studies are done on surveys of ranges of their opinions on a variety of things, and they're accurate. This thing about hiring, I spoke at the University of Delaware, and a white-haired, usually conservatives have white hair because they got in before the exclusionary system was set up. And I asked him, about conservatives on the faculty. He said, well, I used to be the chair of the department. He was the senior member of the department. I used to be the chair of the department, and under my tenure, we hired a Marxist. He said, but they haven't allowed me to be on a search committee. That's what looks for 16 years. He said, this year, we had a candidate from Stanford who was obviously the most qualified. But he didn't get the job. So I went to the chairman and I asked him why. And he said, he gave a terrific interview. That was the scholarly stuff. But then we went out to lunch and he let on that he was for school choice, and that killed it. So there's all ways to do this. The fact is, we know the population is split somewhat, but faculties are uniform. And the question is, what is going on in the hiring process to produce that? I will tell you right now that the entire ethnic studies department at University of Colorado is Ward Churchill, every one of them. They voted for him, they voted to elect him, they've defended him. So there's no variety in that department.
I'd like to follow up on
let me say, I didn't mean to, I know the University of Oregon is, for some reason, underfinanced. And it's true that professors here make less than professors elsewhere. At Princeton, the average pay for a full professor is $180,000 a year. And that's for 6 hours a week in class, 8 months out of the year, the 4 months paid vacation, at family time, incredible perks, medical care, and so forth. And yet I'm told that Republicans are not hired because they don't seek jobs because they want to make money. Yeah.
I'd like to follow up on the point that's just being discussed right now. Professor Leff identified one of the main issues as the existence and significance of ideological indoctrination in undergraduate classrooms. And this has been discussed right now. We've heard a little bit more about it. And the suggestion that I want to make is to come further to grips with that question, to talk about what kinds of evidence would count that either the administration is failing or that students are feeling as if their views are being stifled or as if their grades are being unfairly assigned because of their political positions. And I'm a full professor and have worked in administration as well as teaching many undergraduate writing classes in which students really reveal their positions far more often than they do in other classrooms where grades are assessed by multiple choice exams. And the mechanisms that are in place that are relevant are two. One is that on course evaluations, one of the standard questions is often, did you feel free in this class to express your point of view? And I think that a relevant form of evidence that there's a danger here, or relevant evidence that there is not a danger here, would be to examine those kinds of surveys and how seriously that kind of issue is taken into account in tenure and promotion. A second mechanism is a complaint mechanism, and Cary, you started to address that situation. A situation in which any instructor who seems to be imposing a grade based on an issue of political orientation, there are mechanisms where the student would come to the professor if the professor was not addressing the issue fairly. They would come to the department chair or to another person who adjudicates those cases. And so that mechanism is actually in some ways similar to, I think, the situation at Penn State, where I was a faculty member for 11 years before moving to Texas. These are in-place mechanisms, and it would be interesting to know whether there are many of these that come up. In my experience, most students do not complain about grades being awarded unfairly on the basis of political orientation. They're mainly complaining about actual following of course guidelines and requirements, like coming to class. And so most of the course complaints are not on that topic. But I would suggest that those would be the kinds of evidence where the two sides of this issue could come to grips.
Those seem good ideas about one way to try to survey the reality of student opinion. The film did not seem to suggest that there were hordes of undergraduates who felt ideologically oppressed and restricted here in this fair state. I think that there absolutely should be mechanisms where students can protest a grade that they think was unfairly awarded for any reason, including unfairly punished for their political beliefs. I mean, that's absolutely essential. The problem with Penn State is that that's a system to investigate political expression by faculty, which I don't think is appropriate. But a right to repeal a grade that's inappropriately assigned is something that the AAUP confirmed decades ago, and we stand strongly behind. And you know, if I invite you to study 5 million or so student evaluations and see what can be learned from them. I very much look forward to seeing the report of the research. It's a good idea.
I think the grade issue is almost irrelevant now because almost every university has that, and that means that professors who indoctrinate will give students who disagree with them a good grade. Also, can you express yourself is pretty, also, it's not a good question. Because, well, first of all, there's the ridicule factor. I don't know how many students would know that that is something to complain about. The fact is, so I would do it differently. Were texts assigned on both sides of issues with differing opinions on controversial issues? Did the professor use class time to rail about, well, you don't have to use that word, but to make speeches about subjects that were irrelevant to the subject of the class? That would be a good one. These questions could be resolved pretty quickly if universities had an interest in these issues, which they don't. And the Penn State, there are only 2 universities in the entire country which give students rights. That is, almost every university has some fragment of the AAUP's classic statements on academic freedom in its boilerplate. One of them is that a professor must not persistently bring into the classroom controversial matters that are irrelevant to the subject. Of course, very few professors are familiar with this, and no students. The innovation at Penn State and at Temple, which I am responsible for, is to say if a professor is expected to observe these academic freedom provisions, then a student has a right to expect the professor to do that. That's revolutionary. There's only 2.
We have time for 2 more questions. We'll finish it up at 9 o'clock.
This question is specifically for David Horowitz. You speak of the importance of respect and civility. I am wondering, do you believe that you are employing reasoned debate when you refer to people with differing views from yours as idiots and loonies? Those are quotes.
Sure. First of all, I'm not in a classroom. Well, let's hear it for the loonies. I am not in a class. This is not a classroom setting. This is a public debate. If I were standing in front of students over whom I have grading power, I would be very careful about what I said and how I expressed it. And that's what I mean about professionalism. There does have to be a professional ethic. I would never do this. And in a class where I knew there were left-wing students, I would never refer to them as loonies. I would never say that Marx is a flat earth theory. Because my task as a teacher would be to explain to them, to teach them how to look at Marxist theory. And I would try not actually to prejudice them on this. I would try to give them, you have to ask, how has this worked out in practice? Read what this critic says, read what this Marxist says, and so forth. Now, this issue has been brought up about John Bellamy Foster, who is he's a pro-Castro leftist. He writes for his books are all published by Monthly Review Press, which is a Maoist little left-wing press. All of that is fine, but his courses are all in these subjects. He teaches, I forget what the Marxism or this or that. One can doubt that this gentleman, I would have to look, and the lady asked about what the criterion are, at the class reading. If he's assigning Leszek Kolakowski, or Thomas Sowell's book on Marx, or some critic of Marxism, I would not have an objection. I'd have to sit in the class to see if he's imposing the views. It's not a simple cut and dried issue. My problem is I can't get the AAUP, which is a professional association, or any of the professional associations, to agree that there should be a standard to which professors are accountable. And that's why I've compared the university to Enron, where the accountants just made up their own rules. And that's what academic freedom is coming to mean. You make up your own rules.
When I put my syllabi online before I teach a course, anybody can see exactly what's in the syllabus before they sign up or don't sign up. And I have no objection to anyone saying, why didn't you include this? Why didn't you include that? I get that sort of commentary all the time. All I would object to is any power that would force me to change my syllabus. In my view, academic freedom means I put in the syllabus what I want to put in the syllabus, and that's fine if that's debated on campus, so long as there is no power to force me to change it. And indeed, the AAUP, not as long as I'm on 2 feet, is going to suggest that there should be a power that does that.
One last question.
Yes, thank you. If I'm understanding the argument correctly, it's based on a dichotomy between the left and the right, liberal, conservative, Democrat, Republican, or some kind of iteration of that. And my understanding was that this was mostly a conventional distinction that's useful for the popular press. When we look at left and right, they mean entirely different things if we're talking about social policy, if we're talking about economic policy, international policy. And so my question is first, am I correct in understanding that this argument boils down to this conventional distinction? And second, is there something that's being lost in accepting this distinction? Is there a way to make it more subtle by complicating it?
Well, I think you're largely right that when one argues over the political positions of faculty members across the country, it is a pretty simplistic distinction that doesn't allow the fact that many faculty members' beliefs simply don't fall easily into those categories. It's not very it's on the left, it's not very popular, for example, to have supported the war in Afghanistan but objected to the war in Iraq. Yet that happens to be my position and the position of many of my friends. And where does that actually fall out in terms of left-right views? It doesn't map onto them very easily. So I think you're right that actually views are often more complex than that.
Is there anything you would interject to distinguish your argument without using that traditional distinction?
Well, I think there are several issues. I believe that academic freedom means that faculty members get to teach the way they want to teach, so long as they are respectful of their students, rational, a few other, if they're teaching a discipline, they have to represent the discipline fairly, or if they don't, there are many mechanisms whereby the department can intervene and deal with that faculty member. So I think, we do have real differences about the level of intellectual freedom that faculty should have in designing and teaching their courses. And whether that's really a left-right distinction, I'm not sure that it is. It's a difference in point of view about what the nature of academic freedom should be.
I don't think it's possible to get a more nuanced discussion unless there is a goodwill on the part of faculty in the university to discuss it, which there isn't at this point. I disagree with Cary on this. This is a fundamental disagreement. Professors can't teach anything they want in a classroom, because if they could, again, a student could walk into an astronomy class at this university and be given a whole term of lectures on astrology. And if you think that that's unlikely, well, it is, because the hard sciences are a disciplined profession, whereas the soft ones and the humanities generally, and not in every case and not in every department, are not. I have had to fight a course at the University of Indiana, which was in the sports and health department, and was billed in the catalog as a course on the OSHA rules. And we got a complaint from a student in the course that the entire term was taken up with the Israeli-Arab conflict taught from the Hamas perspective. Now, this is a form of consumer fraud, and I actually contacted the Attorney General of the state to see if he would sue the university, but of course nobody wants this kind of trouble. So we embarrassed them by publishing it, and it was I called the chairman of the department, and he saw no problem with that course. And I've written this up in a book I called Indoctrination U, Kansas State, in a social work program. A course was in social work and social welfare, was entirely a chapter-by-chapter reading of Howard Zinn's absurd history, people's history of the United States, as a Stalinist view of American history from Columbus to the Vietnam, well, beyond the Vietnam War, whole class devoted to the remarkable victory in Vietnam of the communists. Now, what's my complaint about this course? My complaint about this course is that somebody who's qualified to teach social work is not qualified to teach a history of the Vietnam War or history of the United States. And if there's going to be there's got to be some kind of professionalism when, I mean, I think it's a disgrace that a state university charges the kind of tuition they charge, but students are paying $7,000, $8,000 a year. They want an education, they need to be credentialed, their time is being wasted, and it is a form of consumer fraud. All I'm asking for is for Cary and his colleagues to say, this is what we mean by professional teaching, and we expect you to teach this way in the classroom.
Just very quickly, let me say that it really is a fallacious argument to say that academic freedom means an astronomer can teach, mystical theory, or that a geologist can teach that the Earth is flat. The AEUP has consistently maintained that irresponsible representation of an academic discipline is grounds for being removed from the classroom. So, that's not what academic freedom means.
Well, I'm going to send you a list of courses from Women's Studies Department where professors of literature, in fact, very famous ones, teach about global American imperialism.
Okay. Okay, so
and I want to see you do something about it.
The debate will go on. It's not over. So for tonight it is. And I know that there were 2 or 3 people that wanted to pose questions over here and over here, so please come forward and please thank our advocates for their presentation.
Yeah.